As I sit eating a banana Monday morning after the Super Bowl and waiting for my friends to jump on the pod, I'm reflecting on just how many shiny objects we've been dodging over the past few weeks. Is TikTok dead? Is Meta canceled? Does anyone even care about the Super Bowl anymore? We'll get into all of it. On behalf of the Ad Club, I'm your host, Kristen Barth, and this is Shiny Objects.
I'm Ryan Vinicombe. I'm a VP Strategy Director at Arnold Worldwide. Recently boomeranged back after a little sojourn at some other spaces, but started my career there. And I focus on pretty much anything that touches the internet or doesn't have a clear description of what it is. It usually hits my desk, which can be a many thing. But
Lindsay Gambo, what's the best way to describe me? I'm a consultant. I create content. I speak. So I guess the best way would be I consult and advise. I speak and I create content around the creator economy, influencer marketing, and social media. I've been doing this aspect of my career for the last 7 months, but before I was at a company called Later, which was previously known as Maverick, and really focused on helping brands with their influence marketing strategy with kind of a more narrow focus on innovation. So helping brands work with creators across new platforms and formats and new ways beyond sponsored content. And also just looking at the greater kind of digital landscape of how creators and influencers connect to a brand's digital marketing and social and paid strategy.
I feel like maybe 5, 6, including COVID, maybe 10 years ago, it would feel like such a niche of a focus, but that corner of the industry is just growing and growing and clearly not going anywhere. So it's really cool that you've doubled down on that piece of the business.
Yeah, and I feel like you have to know a little bit of everything, right? Whether
Totally.
you're doing organic social or influencer, you have to know enough because they're intertwined today.
I thought maybe we start with the Super Bowl stuff, not something that we intended on talking about for this episode, but I thought it'd be really nice to just Monday morning coming off of the Super Bowl would be fresh in our minds. And one piece to it, an idea with shiny objects is not to look at the big behemoths of issues and problems that we want to solve in our industry. It's all the little things that might distract us, and the Super Bowl, while it is this behemoth, there's also like complexity to it. It used to be the conversation of like, how are you going to manage second screening? And now it's like, when are we not second screening? And is that even something we should be focused on anymore? Or is it? And I've really found this year that it's felt really traditional, actually. We've gone back to the classic 30s and 60s and lots of celebrities. There's been some interesting campaigns that have some run up to it. Did you guys see anything that was, I felt like last year there was like the whole Nickelodeon thing and you had SpongeBob calling the game and there was so much of that. And this year I just felt like there wasn't. Did you guys see anything that was on the non-traditional side?
the two things I always look for is the who's trying to counter program and who's trying to win the we didn't run a Super Bowl commercial, but we got a lot of conversation. I saw Yahoo did a thing where you could email Bill Murray. It was like Bill himself at yahoo.com during the game, and real Bill Murray would reply to you. And they connected up with like a dude with sign thing and tried to do some sort of social ways in. And that was really the only one that hit my feeds of I'm trying to do something that doesn't cost me $8 million for 30 seconds. But yeah, I think the one thing that I've noticed is there's a lot of Super Bowl ads as not like a series finale, but like a season finale to a run up, like the dunking stuff, the Uber Eats conspiracy about food, things in the Super Bowl being named about food. Like they use it as a moment for like their best 30 out of their batch of work, which I thought was interesting. Katie Nolan had the big rant on her podcast the other day that was getting passed around. So I think they tried all the weird experimental stuff, the QR codes bouncing around like a DVD logo, whatever it was. And then they were like, let's just run a funny ad that entertains people.
Who is that? Coinbase bouncing QR code thing. So there was no like second screening programming, like getting people to the phone, which I actually found pretty refreshing. It was just entertainment and storytelling. Some of it was super gluttonous. Others were just great. Some of the chaos marketing that I kind of love for Super Bowl specific stuff. Mountain Dew always does something absolutely crazy. The seal thing was absolutely nuts. Yeah, so I just thought that it was like back to storytelling and entertainment, which I think is really nice. And it gets into the subject matter of this episode because the social media landscape is just treacherous, and we're stuck between two things. What we should do for the brand and brand safety, and where consumers are. And how have you guys managed that landscape? Ryan, from your end, being the strategist behind that go-to-market strategy, and then especially Lindsay with keeping up with the creator culture and how they bounce from one platform to the other and how to manage that out. Ryan, do you want to start with that?
Sure. Yeah, I think one thing that I've tried to push is like betting on content that travels. It's the thing that you see it and you don't think this is so funny. You think, oh, this is so Kristen. I'm going to send it to her. So it does a little bit of the work for you. Like with the fragmentation and brand safety, I don't think your entire presence as a brand should live and die with your presence on those platforms. You need creators, you need communities, you need your evangelists, super fans doing some of the work for you. So I think making good stuff that can travel is one way to skirt that. Like if you're afraid of a platform or can't legally be on a platform or whatever the sort of situation might be, you can still make stuff that ends up there. So that's one way that I think I've been keeping an eye on it. And then the other, as folks move to Discord or Reddit instead of more traditional feed-based stuff, I think people follow their communities, they follow their creators that they like, they follow their social graph. So you can predict a little bit where people are going to go. A lot of people have obviously left X, but there's still a huge sports conversation there. A lot of the tech folks went to Mastodon. So you can see the shifts and it's a little bit, feels like whack-a-mole sometimes. But I think that there are a few things that you can look at and plan for, whether that's like making content for microcultures and being very targeted in the actual subject matter of the content and the targeting of it, or just optimizing for share, trying to earn a spot in the group chat sort of vibe.
Yeah, I can talk about from the brand first. Yeah, I don't even know if brand safety exists today. Of course, some brands are, want to be more safe or less risky than others, but I think, we've seen social media and like society so intertwined where like you get used to the chaos, unfortunately. And whatever platform I'm on, I feel like I'm no longer shocked at what I see from a content standpoint or moderation and whatnot. And I think we've seen brands probably start to get used to that and realize that's the nature of today. But for those that do want to be safer, like creators are the best way to have a presence on those platforms because they're not directly the ones having to say it or worry about any ramifications, whether it's a TikTok where might be banned and they can't be on it, or all the politics around that. Focusing on the creator, I think it's really tough as a creator today because the platforms, you legit live on the platforms where a brand can go run a commercial, they can do billboards, they can do other types of advertising to make up for pulling back on a platform. Where a creator, like your home is these platforms, regardless if you like it or not. And so if you're a creator that built a presence on TikTok, we've seen a lot of creators have to move their audience to other platforms. It's not easy. Even if you can move 50% of that audience, it's still probably a smaller audience than what you might be getting on your primary platform. And so I think for creators, the social media space is fragmented more, and you have to balance out being everywhere, but really focusing on those platforms that give you the best bang for your buck. Less focus on what the platforms are doing from a moderation or brand standpoint, and really focus on your content and community, especially if they live there, while also seeking out more of these own channels or more of these community-based channels like a Discord, your website, and your newsletter. I think we're really at an inflection point for both brands and creators.
I think there's some really interesting strategies out there for brands really focusing on where they should be based on their communities. And I feel like a lot of brands have chosen a platform, right? They're like, we're going to go all in on YouTube. We're going to go all in on TikTok. And we're going to go all in on Creator. And then, flash forward to the end of the year here, and it's chaos, right? It's okay, we doubled down on TikTok. Now TikTok's going away. And what do we do? The panic ensues. Do you think it still makes sense to find the right platform where your community is? Or should you always be looking for ways to design your content so that if you needed to jump ship or start to shift in a different direction, you can easily do that?
I think as long as you don't become like platform captured. If your entire business lives and dies with TikTok, you probably need to diversify. And I think creators are leading with that. Like you were saying, the newsletters, the Patreons, the Discords, like they're finding other ways to own their audience in a different way, to have a more diversified batch of connections with them. I think in this conversation, people really underrate CRM. Like having an email address is killer for a creator. And we forget that brands have hundreds of millions of them just ready to go. And we don't actually lose our connection to these people if TikTok is banned or if people move off of a platform. The thing that is in the back of my head with all this is the decentralized social stuff that's coming up with Blue Sky and Mastodon and all of that, like jumping from platform to platform, like moving from Gmail to Yahoo. You're still allowed to email whoever. It's like taking your phone number from Verizon to T-Mobile. It doesn't actually matter. You own your audience. You can control. If you don't like the algorithm on one platform, you can move and get the exact same content spit out in a different way on another one. And I think that as like a far off thing, hopefully helps with some of this stuff. But in the meantime, I think you just have to be comfortable with building up a strong presence in more than one space. You could be very good at TikTok, see how that translates, or see a different approach to make sure that your Instagram is also built up.
One thing that you had mentioned, Brian, was you can be the purveyors of your story and your content, but you always need those evangelists. You need the content creators that are going to help you along the way, legitimize maybe your message a little bit, and help you with content creation in general, diversifying different types of content. Lindsay, do you think that there's risk in that as well? I think brands have done a great job in the past having their spokesperson, right? The celebrity level, bigger personality. Now it's fragmented based on the creator. Do you think that relationship building between brands and content creators is important, or do you want to have some agility in there too?
Yeah, I think you need to do both. I think when you are working with creators, being able to build those strong relationships gives you the ability to expand beyond just a TikTok or Instagram or just sponsor content. So typically when you're working with a creator, they probably have their own primary platform that aligns with yours. And you want to work with them to drive results and whatnot. But creators tend to be first movers, especially when it comes to platforms. And so that's an opportunity as a brand to onboard to a new platform or something different. And it can be a lot easier than you as a brand and your internal team having to figure out, hey, how do we activate on Blue Sky? How do we activate on other decentralized platforms? But hey, we have these creator partners that we're seeing move to other platforms and driving innovation. Can we still drive our KPIs and have the core part of our influencer creator program while testing and learning on these other channels in a way that isn't going to totally take up our budget or time or effort? And then I also think too, the beauty today is that everyone's a creator in some fashion, right? Even if they don't think of themselves, where as a brand, you really have the opportunity to work with anyone, and you have the opportunity to not only build relationships with individuals, but also as a creator community. If you're a brand and you go after a celebrity, that contract might run out and maybe they did something that put them in bad PR, or maybe they're more expensive. If they're the face of your company, then once they're gone, you have to go back to the drawing board. If you work with enough creators where enough creators are showing up on your behalf, you're less at the liberty of a platform, just like you are with a creator. And so it's diversifying your platforms, but also diversifying your advocates and your partners outside of your internal teams.
I think the first mover thing you mentioned is really interesting. I feel like Vine unofficially invented influencer marketing because there was no paid placements and we were like, where do we put our stuff? Some people tried organically, but I feel like that Vine Stars was really the first sort of moving this. And it was just out of necessity that we literally couldn't run paid media and our organic stuff wasn't working. So I think that first mover thing, as people are shifting and downloading the new app of the week that's maybe going to replace one of these stalwarts, like that is a way that you don't have to stand up a whole presence and get approval and do the whole thing. You can test the waters with creators.
Yeah, Vine has come up a lot recently just because we're seeing history repeat itself a little bit, right? We saw Vine boom and then crash. Once it ended, all the creators just shifted to Instagram. Instagram had its moment. Now you have TikTok. TikTok, is it going away? Is it not going away? Where are the content creators going to go? I was feeling confident in that, right? I'm like, they'll show up somewhere and then we'll go there and it's going to be okay. Lindsay, what you were mentioning about being able to test different platforms with influencers, I think is a really important one. It could be a difficult strategy to sell to a client if we're not owning our narrative on these new platforms. Are we handing over too much to the creator? Ryan, thinking about how to build that into your social strategy is an interesting one. I'm curious if you've explored that at all. The using content creators as a way into an emerging platform.
You could see celebrities that fit the brand, celebrities that fit the concept, and then celebrities that you could afford. Starting there with what is the closest natural connection? Do we have anyone that we know actively loves our brand? Figuring out a way. Something that we've thought about with some clients is whether they don't have a presence on a platform or the nature of their business and regulation doesn't really easily allow them to get on there. That's a place where we've seen that influencer marketing is an unlock there of if you can't really reach out to that or you don't have the people power or whatever the reason that you're not on a platform is, this is a pretty effective shortcut to get there and to maybe prove out to folks that it's not as scary or it is as effective as we need it to be. And it's also, I think creators is always in the back of my mind on pretty much any project now, but especially so if we are stepping into a space that is unfamiliar with us, whether that's a community or a platform, having an advocate on our side, having somebody that is saying, no, it's okay that so-and-so is here is a nice way to protect yourself from the busting into the cocktail party and yelling about whatever the metaphor we used in 2015. You can avoid that if you've got a friend. And I think those longer term partnerships, not necessarily in years, but working with a creator for a little bit, getting their audience familiar with you, and then broaching that new space, probably a safe way in.
Yeah, my role when I had a 9-to-5 was really focused on this, like pitching new opportunities to brands. And it's challenging, right? Because if you don't have the benchmarks, the KPIs, or the case studies, some aren't willing or they can't see it. Yeah, it's like an equal balance. But one thing I think about a lot is like TikTok. A few years ago, there was a lot of brands that were hesitant to get on TikTok. And I remember some of the biggest video brands like a GoPro that we pitched TikTok and they weren't open to that at that time. If you think about some of the brands that are huge on TikTok, at some point they said no. The way that we positioned TikTok was like as a way for you to onboard to this platform because they're creating the content that's native to TikTok, that's very different to Instagram. And so at the very least, I think if you're a brand that's like trying to figure out like, how do we launch a Substack, right? It's different than a newsletter. Let's partner with some creators that how to build that community. They know how to leverage those different social media tools within Substack. And then we can learn from what works from that partnership and then launch our own if we want to.
These platforms have popped up in a shiny objects sort of way. I think it's difficult to manage that a little bit. The perfect scenario, obviously, is who your community is and you want to continue that conversation with them, so go where they go. But the reality is your community is everywhere. Conversations are shifting and changing all of the time. With some of these apps that are just popping up all over the place, what are the ones that we're supposed to be taking seriously and what aren't? When Blue Sky started really getting a bit more mainstream, that to me felt like one. How have you guys managed that, or how have you been able to measure what is worth pursuing, when you should take a step back and decide, let's just dip our toe or maybe avoid it?
The volume of US users is one place to look. Like you see Threads, I think they're at like 100 million, and let's say 30, 50, 20, whatever the sort of number is, they're rolling out an ad platform. They see themselves maturing. I think when you start to see signs that it's more formal, that it's no longer an experiment, that it wasn't just a sort of thing to capitalize on a bumpy moment for X, you see a reality there. I think some of the Blue Sky, if they were owned by a more traditional player, I think you'd see them being taken a little more seriously. I think there is still, what is AT protocol? People don't entirely understand. It's going to be like a little more complicated to onboard, but politicians and ESPN and those types of players getting there. I think Blue Sky really attracted a lot of journalists as they lost something with the way that X went. They turned to Blue Sky as a place where they can have that real-time news conversation. And that obviously has a big sort of snowball effect attracting users, because if you're not getting the latest and greatest on a sort of short form text-based platform, you're going to go to the one where the latest and greatest is. So I think that became Threads and Blue Sky sort of a combo, and there's definitely an audience breakdown of who adopted it. Adam Schefter, the NFL reporter, is on Threads, and that's a guy that you can't not follow if you're an NFL fan. Elizabeth Warren and AOC are on Blue Sky, so if you're looking for up-to-the-minute updates from your representative, maybe you go there. Do they have an ad platform story? Do they have a user base that is compelling? Do they have the right folks? I think at the early stages of these, they definitely attract a certain type of person because it travels in certain circles. So if your circle hasn't really hit there yet, whether it's a sports conversation or a knitting conversation or book talk or whoever hasn't arrived at Blue Sky, it might not be super attractive to you yet. So I think there's a lot that goes into it. Communities, creators, and social graph. Who are people moving around with? And does that align with you and your goals and who you're looking to hit with content? The scale is probably number one, but in my head.
When Threads launched, I thought it was a great opportunity already because we've seen Meta either build a Facebook or take an Instagram and make it way bigger than what it was. You have X, Twitter, whatever we're calling it, existing, but it's hard to bet on some of these big platforms. Threads might not ever be bigger than X, but we know they can build something there. And for a brand that's really heavy on Instagram, it's a sister or brother, whatever you want to call it, app. And you have to think that eventually ads are going to come like they are. You have to eventually think that creators are going to jump on it because they see it as an opportunity. When it comes to like Blue Sky and decentralization, that's something I'm really big on, even though I don't think those platforms will ever be as big as some of the traditional platforms. But I think when it comes to where we're going as kind of social media, each platform has its pros and cons. I don't agree with some of the moderation things that Meta's doing. It's a platform that I enjoy. And so there's benefits of going over to a decentralized platform if that's the type of environment I want. And so I think it's as a brand, what's great is that almost every platform has short form video, and then every platform has short form text. And so maybe you're not fully committed to creating native content for each of those new platforms, but you can at least get started by repurposing it and making some tweaks and seeing how that performs, especially in the short form text space where essentially the content is what it is and the audience is a little different there.
You got to be considered, but sometimes it is just different rectangles and different web browser tabs. Like it's really not that different sometimes. And one thing that I think is interesting is on platforms like X, because it is Threads, whatever the sort of text-based especially, I think there's a stat that like 1% of people do 99% of the posting, or give or take. One thing that I thought is really interesting is Blue Sky, as they've grown, when they report user growth numbers, they also report unique posters to say real people are posting. Like anybody can go and just put on a read-only version of it and just read the news in an app. But if you are actively engaging in it, you're building a community, you're building a platform that has momentum and engagement. But if you're just seeing people show up and read, that's a news app. You're not really building a social network. Or in TikTok, I'm a very passive TikTok user. To me, it is a pure entertainment platform, but there's obviously millions and millions of normal people that are making videos that get 10 views because they just love the platform and one of them will pop off. There's definitely a deep engagement. So I think that's another sort of measure of, is this a thing yet?
It's also the different algorithms, right? I think we as the industry experts are looking at that, but I think consumers too, they feel it deeply. You can feel the difference in the algorithm on Instagram versus the algorithm on TikTok, and that's real. And I'm curious how the algorithm culture is shifting where people go as well and how they're consuming content. One that in particular that I'm thinking about, actually LinkedIn. Lindsay, you just published something about doubling down on video content and this rise of vertical video on LinkedIn in particular, and LinkedIn content creators is really interesting. I want to be consuming it more than I am right now because they're in a bit of an awkward phase of pushing that type of content out. It's so influenced by the bigger players, obviously the Instagram Reels and the TikTok of it all. Do you see that becoming a bigger thing on that platform? And has that changed the way that we think about B2B marketing?
Yeah, I owe a lot to LinkedIn to my career. A big part of why I got my first social job, I got laid off, and I just had 6 months of a resume in social media influencer marketing, and I was writing blog posts on my site, and I'm like, let me see how this works if I just copy and paste the content and create it natively as opposed to linking out. And so I've been doing that since 2018. And so I've been lucky to see the evolution of LinkedIn as a content platform. And so now we're like in this video chapter, but if we look back during the height of the pandemic where we saw more people starting to post native content and like thought leadership outside of just links, you can kind of see the evolution. And so I'm bullish on LinkedIn, I think for a lot of different reasons. I think especially in the B2B space, I would actually argue LinkedIn's probably the best place to be as opposed to an X or Twitter. And I think the emergence of short form video is even more of a reason, especially as a marketer. Think about this podcast. This can be chopped up and shared to LinkedIn easily. And if you're trying to get in front of a professional audience, LinkedIn's the best place to do it. And what they really focus on is insights and knowledge and helping people, which is a little different than the other short form video spaces. Yes, you have B2B creators on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube Shorts, but for the most part, the content, when you go on LinkedIn, you're going to get some type of news commentary or marketing or day in a life that combines professional and personal aspect. And I think it's unlocking a new pool of creators that are marketers that have insights like all of us here that can do a talk and face video or chop up a podcast and be able to essentially be creators and build an audience and monetize by bringing new clients to the business or brand partnerships or speaking or consulting. The whole reason why I was able to go solo was because of my LinkedIn network and building that personal brand, but also doing the work and sharing it. So yes, I think it's a huge opportunity. I see more dollars being pushed into it from influencer marketing, but also from the brand creative side.
I think there is something of a quality bar on LinkedIn that gets met because we all are, it becomes a little bit of, it's not as diverse a content set as an Instagram, but it's a lot of people that know a lot of stuff that is usually held in the four walls of a company, peeling back the curtain and letting a little bit out in a nice professional sort of setting. And it does feel like there's a bar. Some people go a little wild sometimes, but it does feel like there's a bar there that like real people talking about real things and they mean it. It's not just for fun.
Yeah, LinkedIn is such a big one. Like, where can I get information about a brand or a product that is just going to get right to the point in an entertaining way, but in a way that's believable. And I think that's a verification measure that I think is nice for brands. That kind of safety is really nice. And then you have Reddit on the other side, where that's where people go if they're looking for the real information. It's like, what is the platform that I should be using if I need to change the oil of my car and I'm choosing between this and this? Yeah, so that information sharing is really interesting, but it's a bit Wild West in terms of the anonymity that is happening there and the lack of verification there. There's huge opportunity, though, for brands to start owning those conversations and becoming part of the community. Is it worth pursuing, or is it something that is just we would have to build out an entire department in order to manage it kind of thing?
I think there's a couple of different ways you can do the sort of surprise and delight approach where it's, wait, Nike's in here? Like, what are you doing here? If you're trying to tell various stories about your brand, like if you are a food brand, bring out the guy who sources your tomatoes and have him do an AMA in r/tomato.
Right.
There's a lot of different ways to slice it. And I think some of them are long-term commitments that would require a lot of community engagement, standing up your own subreddit and doing the whole thing, or just showing up consistently. Don't just do drive-by everything, but there's ways to pop in occasionally.
I think it's a great platform for social listening. What was it? The Sarah V. I know they had that great campaign with Michael Cera, and that was all built from social listening on Reddit. There's a lot of opportunity to see what conversations are happening around your brand, product, and service, and how can you either address those or amplify those. I also think what's really interesting with Reddit too is like all the different ad formats that have been birthed since it's IPO'd, like the AMA ads. I think that's really interesting where a brand can partner with a celebrity or even a creator that's native to the digital world to do like a sponsorship thing where they're not necessarily leading the conversation, but a creator on their behalf is leading that conversation within a community that is relevant. One of my predictions, I think this year Reddit will launch something that will connect Reddit creators with brands so that they can partner.
Fingers crossed on that.
Yeah, and I think so because for the last couple of years when I have talked to brands about Reddit, hey, we want to partner with Reddit creators. And the hardest thing is like finding who is actually a Reddit creator because a lot of them are anonymous. And also the communities themselves are really focused on this organic and honest reviews as opposed to sponsorships there. But I do think for Reddit, if you're thinking about accelerating their ad business, is to find a way for a brand to partner with a creator that is a moderator of a community and figure out how can they work together, whether it's through an ad format or through Ask Me Anythings or just other ways, because I do think there's a lot of dollars that brands will pay to be able to have access to those communities with the permission of the people that are leading them.
Reddit just launched Reddit Answers,
Yep.
like ChatGPT, but for Reddit. And what it surfaces things in a way that I think is even a little cleaner than social listening tools. It gives you the threads and the subreddits. Everyone I've showed it to at work has been like, yes, absolutely. I will go to this website.
I think it's a bit untapped right now. There's such opportunity for them to grow from a paid perspective. They're already doing a lot, and there's really nice ways for brands to manage through that platform in a paid space. And it feels as authentic as it can be on a platform like that. There's just something charming about the kind of Craigslist-y, wacky vibe of it all. It's so unpolished. And I think we might gravitate towards that a little bit. We talk a lot about community building and finding your community and focusing there for your content creation for your brands. But there is always the inevitable taking your big campaigns, finding ways to chop it up authentically for your platforms and using paid as an opportunity. It feels like something that really hasn't changed much. Has there been anything that's really popped up for you guys in terms of how to navigate the paid space in a way that isn't disruptive to users and allows for brands to be invited in, even though it's in that paid space that's inevitably yuck?
Something that it's a tried and true format in Platform Decks, the recut, remix, reimagine thing.
Yep.
You go and you shoot a nice glossy 60-second ad that's perfect for everywhere it's got to go. You've got the 30, you've got the 15s, but pulling stills and turning them into memes, making them a canvas for other people to create memes with, like just it fully unrelated to the concept of the ad. Just if you have a funny visual or interesting something, chopping those up in different and interesting ways, whether that's, okay, we've done our 6s and 10s by that, we just took the punchline, or there was a really interesting striking visual or something that was very clearly meme worthy. That's one thing that we've done. And we also have shifted to experimenting with using our creator content, using more organic feeling stuff in paid and seeing some decent results. You have to change your message up a little bit. You got to be a little bit more hardworking to make sure that the necessary arrow that needs to go up goes up. But I think people are a little more forgiving than we previously had this very strict kind of church and state paid content and organic content. I think there's a nice kind of soft middle that feels a little less fake that we can rely on. And we've seen decent results with it.
I think creator-led advertising formats are the way to go. Like Meta partnership ads, which used to be called branded content ads, TikTok Spark ads, even LinkedIn thought leader ads. That's also popping up a lot. I think one of the things, a big focus of mine a couple of years was building out the paid offering at my last company and figuring out how that fits, how does influencer and creators fit within paid media. And a lot of times we saw creator content outperform brand creative because it was more native, because it fit in with the rest of the content you're seeing on a platform. It resonated more with people. And so I think where we are to the point where you have the great targeting of these platforms, even though some of it has gotten worse because of privacy and whatnot. But if you're able to leverage different creators and have different creators that are producing content that's different messaging and targeted to a different audience, you're able to combine the two where you get a little more targeting, but also a little more nuance when it comes to the different audiences you're trying to reach. What I've seen to be really great when it comes to creative content as ads is that instead of trying to make the perfect ad from scratch, if you have a bunch of creative content, you can figure out what performs best from an organic standpoint. And typically that's going to give you an idea of what's going to perform best from a paid standpoint. I think a lot of brand strategies today when it comes to creative content is to put out a bunch of organic content, see what rises to the top, and then use whatever metrics they're focused on as the indicator of what should be amplified for paid, and repeat that process and tweak it. And so I think going forward, we're just going to see more advertising formats where you can amplify UGC or existing content that's performing well. And I think that will be a big thing, especially for those brands that are bringing more of their brand creative and creator content and UGC together, where you get this perfect mix of user-generated ad format.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a little bit of, if it looks like a creator and it talks like a creator to the viewer, it is a creator. And we've done a lot of creator as talent, where you rent a house and fill it with all your products and go and shoot for a day, or just have somebody shoot a more naturalistic version of your ad, whether we're tapping into them for their audience, whether they have 10,000 followers or a million followers, just using that sort of as a natural person talking to an iPhone that feels like something else you see in TikTok is like pretty simple and not the most revolutionary strategy, but is pretty effective.
Yeah, and I think, how do you look at these landscapes and try to find ways to create content that people expect without becoming the wallpaper? We want to shift or do something different to stand out. We don't want to stand out so much so that it doesn't belong there, but enough to get that attention. We want to fit in and stand out at the same time. And it's such a
Kristen, have you been reading my slide decks or?
That's the whole thing right now. Ritz-Carlton just did, maybe a couple months ago, they created like a Wes Anderson style film. And I did a deep dive on it because I was like, this is so different. This is so interesting. And its sole intention is to just set the vibe of what Ritz-Carlton represents, bring luxury down to the general public for us to experience and live in from a content standpoint, which was really beautiful. It wasn't so highbrow that it seemed unattainable. It was luxury that I feel like I want to explore, and it just became a bit of a shift. But the content itself had no right to be on TikTok. It wasn't creator content, right? But when you looked at the version of it on YouTube, the version of it on Instagram, the version of it on TikTok, it all was a little bit different. They had the YouTube piece was much more filmic. The TikTok stuff, they, along with it, launched a line of merch. They did a collab with another brand and made this like really awesome merch. So they focused more on that for TikTok and almost did like a clothing brand kind of feel to it. But it was such a different way to show up. And it was so unexpected that it really caught my eye. Hard to decipher from a consumer standpoint outside of just like digging into the comments and people being like, what is this?
Something we talk a lot about is that best practices only exist because somebody tried something once and it worked. Like there is these things that we get caught up in and you get told no, that it can't be this quality or this type of approach. Something that we were talking about in our Teams chat the other day, the Celtics dropped a little video series that was like postcards from the road. And there were these beautiful sort of, not like Wes Anderson is sort of not the vibe, it wasn't the colors, but it was shot in a more filmic way. And it was these really quiet moments. It was like way low energy. It wasn't Jason Tatum posterizing somebody. It was Al Horford laying with his head down on the court in silence. It was a guy on the bench and you could hear his breathing. They like sound designed it and pumped in some audio. It was guys coming off the bus and not in the like fit walk way, but in the we're on the road and this feels like a real thing. And there was just a series of 3 of them in a carousel. And all the people in the comments were like, this rules. So my favorite comment was somebody was like, the Celtics social media team needs to be tested for performance enhancing drugs. Because the stuff was just so quality and interesting. That shouldn't be their profile all the time, but you can throw something out there and maybe the postcards from the road becomes a series and it takes over the NBA. Everybody does it now, but it was just, they tried something and it was every 5th post, maybe you give that a shot.
I love that.
Yeah, that kind of I mean, as we're both talking, it's actually something I thought about a lot. At one end, you have to create content, be native and fit in with the everyday user, right? And then also, in both cases you brought up, you have to do something that's outside the norm, right? Every day you're posting content that feels like it's native to the platform and people are seeing it, but then you switch things up with something that you don't expect to be there. And that's where you have the opportunity to test and learn, but also create those buzzy moments and that word of mouth. And so can you really play in the middle? I feel like in the middle, you're doing half and half, no one really cares.
You've got social camouflage and social peacocking.
And it really comes down to good planning, I think, right? All brands have different important spikes throughout the year. You can't just sustain standing out all the time. You need to create that organic or paid, but create that mid to lower funnel content that's like hitting your messaging hard, making people aware or educate them on the things that you need to educate them on. Stay true to those messages, but in those important times of the year, that pre-planning stage is so key. So you can hit those right before that big peak for your year. You do some kind of out of the box thing. So eyeballs start to go that way, but in a way that's, wait, look over there. That's something different happening, something important happening. And that's when awareness turns into relevance. And that shift is so key, but you have to be able to do it thoughtfully by platform, like we've been talking about this whole time. And it doesn't always have to be this over-polished filmic thing. It's just thinking differently, but in a way that still feels authentic to the brand. Those are the things that really stand out to me.
I was at CES in January, and I believe it was one of the marketing leaders from L'Oreal was talking about how they saw with younger generations, Alpha, Gen Z, that straight awareness wasn't really doing anything for them because that audience wanted to know the story behind their process or their ethics, or like a layer deeper was their view of, I am now aware of this company, and that they didn't respond to just awareness. I think what you're talking about, like you got to stand out like a little bit more, like the sort of we exist stuff is a little bit harder. That's what having a profile does, that you can Google someone and be like, oh, they're a legitimate business. But once you're there, you got to show them a little bit more.
Totally. Totally agree. All right, I'm gonna wrap us up a little bit, but I wanted to rapid fire some stuff that's been on your mind. That's something that could potentially distract us from what we're here to do. And more often than not, they turn into things that we should have been doing earlier on. But anything that's popping up for you guys, that's, hey, this is the thing on the horizon that we should be paying attention to. And then also, what are those sort of distractions that are really forcing us to undo our strategies to make it fit and maybe might not be worth it?
We talked about this LinkedIn. I just think, I thought, not that people are late now, but we've been slowly seeing this, especially with B2B brands. And there's no more waiting around. People are looking at what they're doing from a product standpoint and how people are reacting to it. It should be a place for your executives to post their thought leadership, share their news, a place for your employees that want to promote the company, but also have conversations around the industry that can loop people in. So I think LinkedIn as a B2B platform, but also realizing that there started to be a lot more B2C content on there. And the second part, I think, just the distractions. I think if you look at the big scheme of things where we've seen things like BeReal and other things in the past where everyone jumps on it, and a lot of times marketers pushing it like they want to be first and creators. But at the end, once things go back to normal, they don't necessarily become something. Not that they don't exist, but I think that's also this balance of how can you be an early adopter, but not just jump because other people are saying it, but being a little more thoughtful about it.
You see a lot of I think there's a cheap way to do what I'm about to say and a sort of good way to do it. Subway takes, Hot Ones, all of these sort of franchised and serialized things that I know what it is when it hits my feed. So when I'm giving something 3 seconds, I already know a little bit if I want that. So some familiarity, some cheap way of saying it is like content lanes, but something that is visually consistent, that is, whether it's talent, whether it's a format, just something. So when you come across, whether it's your diehards or the casual observer of you, they know it's you and it's not a different thing every single time, because creators don't do that. Sports leagues don't do that. You know what you're going to get if you follow a certain person. They have a shtick, they have a room that they're in, they have a set, they have whatever. Borrowing a little bit from podcasts and YouTube channels and that kind of stuff to make a little bit more of a visually consistent and content consistent, if that works for your brand. But I think that franchising and serializing of content is something that people try to throw too much spaghetti at the wall and they forget about some sort of cohesive something. And that sort of ties into my don't overthink it. You've got 3 seconds with people in the feed. Like the nuanced stories that you want to tell, all of that is so complicated that you just want to catch somebody's attention as they're flipping by. I think of myself as the audience for a lot of these things, and my take on a lot of content is you don't need to be doing all that. So much going on, and it's just entertain me, educate me, give me something that I'm looking for in the moment, and maybe I'll come back, maybe I'll stick around, maybe I'll click the link. But I think especially in those first interactions, you can't be trying to do too much for somebody.
We talked about this again in Substack. I don't use Substack for my newsletter. I use Beehive, but I do think there's a huge opportunity there. I think that from an influencer marketing standpoint, but also from a brand standpoint, you have its own audience in the newsletter, but they have so many different social features, which is why you're seeing a lot more traditional influencers start to launch Substacks, because it's more familiar, but they also get the benefit of the own audience.
Yeah. Something that you had mentioned is brands having a shtick, which I think is such a hilarious way to think about just like brand consistency. And
Duolingo did it like to the moon.
Right. They have a shtick. And I think that's like kind of a nuance and an important one and something to think about. I think as we continue to navigate the complexity of all of these social platforms and try to manage what's right for your brand and your content, I think it's definitely safe to say that your community is actually what matters. And if TikTok goes away tomorrow, that the shift will happen easily. Everyone migrates together as long as you have a clear understanding of who your community is. So I think that's the big takeaway. When TikTok was going away, there was actually just a whole trend in and of itself of everyone saying goodbye. And goodbye videos started to all look the same. It's just fascinating to see how quickly a trend can start. It happened instantly. And I think if you just reverse engineer that and look at how quickly behaviors change and shift, it's an indicator that we're gonna be fine. It reminds me of when Instagram changed their app icon and everyone like just absolutely lost it and were just physically ill over a gradient and like just losing their actual minds. And, you know, it took 48 hours and everyone was just like had forgotten. Or when the browser on iPhones went from the top to the bottom, and I was like, I don't even know how to use my phone anymore.
Oh.
And now I just can't even imagine a world where the browser would be at the top. It doesn't even make sense.
It's too far up. My thumb's not that long.
Right.
We
Right.
underestimate how quickly we adapt in life, but also social media.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you guys. This was a lot of fun.
It's some fun.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Take care.